The Basement Tenant, a novel, written by L.Z. Sinclaire, narrated by L.Z. Sinclaire. She went to see Derek. Not because it was wise. Beth would have told her not to. Beth would have said in her careful Lakeview office with the motivational poster about justice that neither of them believed anymore, that any contact with Derek outside of legal channels was a risk, that anything Carrie said could become an exhibit, that the safest thing was silence. But silence was what the house was full of, and Carrie was done being safe. Ruiz had told her not to confront Elias. She hadn't said anything about Derek. The drive to LaSalle Street took 20 minutes. She spent them thinking about what Cynthia had told her, not just the facts, the affair and the secret and the unacknowledged son, but the way Cynthia had told them, with the exhausted precision of a woman unloading weight she'd been carrying since before Carrie was old enough to understand what weight was. Cynthia had known about the properties, not the details, not the sealed rooms, not Margaret Osai, but the shape of it. She'd heard Derek on the phone with Cross discussing acquisitions and relocation in the language of men who believed their euphemisms protected them. She told Derek once, "Be careful, your father was careful, and it wasn't enough." Derek said, "I'm not my father." Cynthia had looked at him and thought, "You are exactly your father. That's the problem." His office was on LaSalle Street, 32nd floor. Weaver Development Group occupied a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The lobby was all glass and reclaimed wood, the aesthetic of a company that wanted you to know it was both powerful and thoughtful, the corporate equivalent of a BLM sign in a Lincoln Park window. The receptionist recognized her. Of course she did. Carrie had been to this office 100 times during the marriage for holiday parties and quick lunches and the early years visits when she'd bring baby Miles in his carrier and the whole staff would gather around and tell her how beautiful he was. And she'd felt in those moments that she belonged to something, that she'd been admitted to a world larger and more consequential than the one she'd grown up in. The Whitfields had money, the Weavers had power, and power, Carrie had learned, was a different currency, one that didn't appreciate with divorce but simply transferred to the party who knew how to wield it. "Is he available?" The receptionist made a call, held the phone delicately as if it contained explosives. "He says you can go in." "He says you can go in." Even access to him was permission granted from above. Carrie walked down the hallway with its framed Tribune articles about Weaver Development's community projects, the affordable housing initiative that wasn't actually affordable, the youth center that was actually a tax write-off, the press conference where Derek stood next to the alderman and they both smiled like men who had never done anything wrong. His office was large. The desk was a slab of reclaimed walnut, the kind of wood that came with the provenance, a story about the barn it had been salvaged from, the craftsman who'd shaped it, the ethos of sustainability that the desk embodied while sitting in a 32nd floor office that consumed more electricity in a month than the barn had consumed in its entire existence. Behind the desk, a wall of windows, the river, the city skyline, the visual argument that the man who sat here was above it all, literally and figuratively, looking down at the grid from a height that made the people in the streets look like variables in an equation he was solving. Derek didn't stand. He was in a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, the collar open. The studied informality of a man who wanted you to know he was working too hard for a tie. He looked, as he always did, like someone a casting director had selected to play a successful man. The graying temples, the intelligent eyes, the body language of a person who took up space with the entitlement of someone who'd never been asked to make himself smaller. Carrie, her name flattened, drained of inflection, the way you'd say the name of a file you'd already closed. We need to talk about the house. We talked about the house. You got the house. That was the deal. I'm talking about the basement, about what you did to it. Derek's face was the face he wore for depositions, neutral, patient, the mask of a man who learned to treat every conversation as a potential transcript. He leaned back in his chair. The chair probably cost more than Carrie's monthly Lexapro. Everything in this room cost more than something Carrie needed. I renovated the basement, you know that. We discussed it. You hired Apex Building Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Lakefront Property Services, which is a subsidiary of Lakefront Redevelopment Partners, which you own. A flicker. Fast, almost invisible, like a card player's tell, a micro-expression that crossed his face and vanished. He hadn't expected her to dig. He'd forgotten maybe that she used to dig for a living. Or he'd assumed the medication and the loneliness and the custody battle had buried the woman who knew how to read corporate filings the way other people read novels. I used my network, that's not unusual. Nesting 3 LLCs to renovate your own basement is unusual. It's corporate structure, tax efficiency. My accountant... Your accountant also handles Lakefront Redevelopment Partners, the LLC that bought Margaret Osai's house. The temperature in the room dropped. Not literally. The thermostat was probably set to a controlled 72 because Derek's world was a world of controlled temperatures. But the air between them changed. Derek's jaw tightened. The mask held, but the infrastructure behind it shifted, the way a building shifts before an earthquake. Nothing visible on the surface, everything moving underneath. I don't know who that is, he said. She's a 74-year-old woman who disappeared from her Bronzeville brownstone 8 months ago. Her house was sold for 65% of its value to your company 3 weeks after she vanished. Lakefront Redevelopment is a portfolio entity. I don't manage the acquisitions. You sign off on them. Carrie. He said her name again, and this time there was something in it. Not anger, not yet, but the precursor to anger. The controlled tension of a man who was used to being in charge of the narrative and was feeling it slip. Tell me about the back room. He stopped. The sentence he'd been building collapsed mid-construction, and in the rubble of it, Carrie saw what she'd come here to see. The crack, the seam where the performance failed. What back room, he said, but he said it wrong. He said it too quickly, and the question was too specific. Not, what are you talking about, but what back room? As if there were multiple rooms and he needed to know which one she meant. The one behind the renovated wall, in the basement, the room you built. There's no room. The basement is a studio apartment. You've seen it. I've seen what you wanted me to see. Derek looked at her. For a long moment, they sat across the desk from each other, the woman who had loved him, the man who had married her, and the space between them held the compressed residue of 10 years of partnership and betrayal, and the specific intimacy of people who have seen each other at their worst and are no longer afraid of it. I talked to your mother, she said. There was a pause so long it had its own weather. She watched the muscles in Derek's jaw work, the small visible effort of a man processing information that he had categorized as impossible and was now recategorizing as real. His mother who had kept every secret he'd ever asked her to keep, who had built the wall around the Weaver family with the bricks of her own silence, who had chosen loyalty to the name over loyalty to the truth for 40 years. His mother had talked. "She told me everything," Carrie said. It wasn't entirely true. Cynthia had told her what Cynthia chose to tell, which was curated in its own way, shaped by the priorities of a woman who was surrendering some secrets while holding others in reserve. But Derek didn't need to know the boundaries. He needed to know the breach. The crack widened. She saw it, not in his face, which remained controlled, but in his hands. His fingers, which had been resting loosely on the desk, curled inward, a fist forming, not the fist of a man about to strike, the fist of a man trying to hold something in. "My mother doesn't know anything about my business. She knows about Elias." Silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything someone is not saying. Derek's eyes changed, the studied neutrality replaced by something older, rawer, the look of a man whose most carefully guarded secret has been spoken out loud in a room where he cannot control the acoustics. "She told me about Diane Corbin, about your father, about the son no one acknowledged, about you at 23 sitting in the hallway listening to a pregnant woman cry on your mother's couch." "You need to be careful," Derek said. His voice was even, measured, the voice of a man threading a needle. "You're making claims you can't support in the middle of a custody proceeding with a documented mental health history. Think about what that looks like." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice from someone who used to love you." "You never loved me. You curated me." The crack widened further. She saw it, a flash of something real behind the mask, something that might have been pain or might have been fury. And the ambiguity was its own revelation. She'd hurt him, not with the accusation about the LLC or the basement or the missing woman, but with the word curated. Because it was true, and they both knew it, and the truth between two people who have been married is a weapon that never loses its edge. She stood. "I'm going to find what's in that basement, Derek. And when I do, every story you've told about me, the instability, the medication, the erratic behavior, is going to look like what it is, a cover." "Carrie, I'm not the one spiraling. I'm the one paying attention. And you should be scared, because the last time I paid attention to something, it ended up above the fold." She left. She walked through the lobby, past the receptionist who wouldn't meet her eyes, into the elevator. The doors closed. She was alone in a wood-paneled box descending 32 floors, and she looked at herself in the polished brass of the control panel, distorted, elongated, a funhouse version of the woman she used to be, and she thought, "You just told your ex-husband you're coming for him in his own office, where the walls probably have ears, and the receptionist is already texting his attorney." She didn't care. The not caring was new. It felt like oxygen. LaSalle Street hit her with wind off the river, the January wind that Chicago used as a weapon, the cold that meant the lake, that meant the city was reminding you that comfort was a privilege it could revoke at any time. She walked to her car. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the adrenaline of confrontation, the specific buzzing electricity of a woman who has just looked the most powerful person in her life in the eye and told him she sees through him. She sat in the car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. She watched the LaSalle Street foot traffic, the lawyers, the traders, the administrative assistants in their commuter sneakers, the ecosystem of a financial district that existed to convert human labor into numbers on a screen. Derek's building rose above them all, glass and steel and the reflected sky, and somewhere on the 32nd floor, a man she had once loved was sitting behind his desk calculating. She knew what he would do. He would call Lawrence Gill. He would call Cross. He would make arrangements, legal, logistical, the arrangements of a man who understood that threats required responses and that the best response was always to make the threat look like confirmation of the story he'd already told. She's spiraling. She's fixated. She came to my office making wild accusations. By morning, it would be in a filing. She was also afraid because Derek, when cornered, did not retreat. He advanced. He escalated. He used every tool available, legal, social, personal, to ensure that the person who had challenged him regretted it before they ever reached a courtroom. She had just given him warning. The journalist in her, the old her, the sharp one, would have known better. You didn't warn the subject of an investigation. You gathered your evidence in silence, and you published, and you let the truth do the confronting. But she wasn't just a journalist anymore. She was a mother whose son had heard a woman singing in the dark. She was a woman who had kissed a man she didn't understand in a kitchen that was also a crime scene. She was a person whose rage had finally outpaced her caution, and the rage was telling her something the caution never had. You are right, and being right is more important than being safe. She drove home. The brownstone was quiet when she got back, the quiet of a house in the afternoon, the specific stillness of a building with only one person in it, except it wasn't only one person. She stood in the front hallway and listened, and heard him below. The low, steady sound of movement, footsteps crossing the apartment and back, the pace of a man who was also thinking, also awake, also working something out. She had not seen Elias since the night she'd found the room, since the basement, since the wall, was that part of the investigation? And no, that was the part where I forgot what I was doing. She had been carrying that exchange for 2 days in the specific, pressurized way you carry something that has no place to be set down. She went to the kitchen. She took off her coat. She put her hands flat on the counter and stood there, still carrying the buzz of the confrontation with Derek. The adrenaline with nowhere to go now, the rage that had felt like oxygen on LaSalle Street and was now just a current in her blood looking for ground. Below her, his footsteps slowed, stopped. He could hear her too, she realized. He'd always been able to hear her, the walking, the coffee machine, the weight of her insomnia on the floor above him. She stood very still, as if stillness were a kind of privacy, as if the 12 feet of building between them were enough. She needed to move fast. She needed to call Ruiz. She needed to think clearly about what she'd just done and what Derek was going to do next and how much time she had before he turned the confrontation into a filing. She picked up her phone. She did not go to the basement door. She would need to move fast. The end. You have been listening to The Basement Tenant, written by L.V. Sinclaire, narrated by L.Z. Sinclaire. Thank you for listening.